Ladies and gentlemen. This is the 8th day of the L2 construction series. Today, the host, myself, Loon, with my partner, Leong. And we also have a special audience today. His name is Nicholas Sunderland. Before we commence with the session, I just wish to make some announcements. What happened is that some of you may encounter some technical problems when logging into Zoom. And because Zoom has also recently tried to improve their system due to certain complaints associated with the Zoom system. And I was told that there were a lot of registrants who actually registered for the sessions but could not log in to our session despite having the password. For example, yesterday, we actually had registration numbers up to 700 plus, but the people who managed to log in to the system only amounted to about 280 to 300. And many of them were actually, unfortunately, pushed out of the Zoom video conference due to the Zoom system. Now, I'm not so sure whether Zoom has resolved all the problems, and those who are here today, I congratulate you because you managed to log into this webinar and join us for the session. For those who could not, and cannot log in, please do send us a message. And what we will do is that we will consider in the future to have a rerun of certain topics which you find interesting. Now, today's topic is construction management when East meets West. Our main presenter for the topic is Nicholas Sunderland, as I have said earlier. Now, before passing the mic to Nick to introduce briefly about himself, I just want to set out briefly the proceedings or the procedure for the day. After Nick's presentation, there will be questions posed by the host, so we have prepared only a few questions for him to answer. And of course, we will also go through the questions that will be posed by our audience, and we may also modify some of the questions and put certain questions to Nick as well for him to answer. And lastly, for the avoidance of doubts, any views put forward by the presenter today, and it also applies to all the sessions, will be solely his own and does not represent the position of the L2 platform. Now, Nick, over to you.
Selamat pagi, tuan, dan puan. Thank you to Loon and Hongkit for the initiative and their teams behind the scenes for making this happen. So a bit about myself. I have over 20 years experience in the construction industry, having started off studying for my degree in quantity surveying at Salford in Manchester. And before I graduated in 2003, I was running my own multi-million-pound projects as the site QS, dealing with procurement, payments to subcontractors, remeasurement, all the good stuff. After successfully running a number of projects from the start to the final account stage, without any disputes, in 2007, I set up my own consultancy in the UK with some of the biggest industry players working for the likes of Lend-Lease, Balfour Beatty, to name just a couple. In 2012, I wanted a new challenge, so I went working overseas and focused more on construction claims, utilising my knowledge which I had gained from working on sites for contractors. So I am pro-contractor, I will say that now. This challenge has seen me working in America, Canada, Thailand, and for the past 4 years in Malaysia, where I have founded Customised Construction Management Services, a construction consultancy offering customised construction services throughout the whole life cycle of a construction process. So where some people just focus on claims, we offer a full spectrum of services, whether that's reviewing contract terms at the outset, during the contract in the administration, post-contract in the claims. And we believe that if we're engaged early enough in the process, we can help mitigate claims because of our successful delivery of projects in the past. So we're going to look at two alternative approaches. One is what we commonly see here on the various projects that we are involved with, and we are calling this the common way, or what we perceive to be the common way. And we will then look at the alternative, which we believe is the way that we've successfully delivered projects for clients in the past based upon our own experiences. We're not saying this is the right way, we're just putting it out there so people can think maybe differently and look at the two approaches. Without further ado, we'll start with the slideshow, if we can, please. Okay, so how do we get to this? What we see is, we can see from the very start that many contracts are destined to fail, in our opinion, because the contract doesn't reflect what the employer actually wants. So what the consultants sell to the employer and buy from the contractor during the tender process are very different. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So do we really believe that we can have picture A and picture B for the same price? But it appears on our experience that certain professionals within the industry, and I don't believe that this is just isolated to Asia, actually do believe that this is the case, and that the professionals entrusted by employers to procure and administer their contract are failing. Next slide, please. So everybody probably knows that the contract is very voluminous. It can be, you know, reams and reams of paper. So the common approach is, you can't expect me to read all that. A lot of it is regurgitated from past jobs, standard jobs, etc. But what is actually embodied within that contract is crucial to understanding. What have the lawyers put in there to try and catch those unsuspecting people out? So undertaking a detailed contract review at the outset is crucial to the success moving forward on the project. Slide, please. Okay, so the contract, having looked at it or not looked at it, has now been signed. So it's crucial that it's administered properly. Now, we've already identified that the contract is very voluminous. So what do we need to focus on? We've already heard previous talks about good contract administration, and those talks have identified that you don't need to know all the clauses within the contract. Some of the clauses are just for information, but there's certain key clauses which you should know inside and out. So we would strongly recommend everybody to focus on variations, payments, EOT claims, and maybe the panel after can add other clauses in which they feel are crucial to the successful administration. Slide, please. So, site meetings, a common site, no pun intended, on every project. The common way here seems to be that everybody's involved in the meeting, including the employer. Now, we don't agree with this approach, because when the boss is there, how can people have honest and open discussions? So everybody's scared of actually saying, oh, this is my fault, that's my fault, okay, how can we get over this hurdle? There will be instances on projects that don't go to plan, but people may not want to expose this in front of the employer. So how can this be looked at differently? Well, the contract administrator can have his own separate meeting with the employer, and he is responsible for providing the information to the employer, all the good and the bad, but telling him, managing his expectations as to where the budget's going, is the project finishing on time, etc. And what this does is this takes the focus off all the other people responsible and part of the team for delivery, to actually enable them to focus on and not be scared of it. So we would suggest that this is something which could be considered. please. So, nominated subcontractors. Now, actually, in the UK, we don't tend to see that many nominated subcontractors. They look at them and call them named subcontractors. But here, what we have is a disillusioned contractor who's just come out of a project, out of a site meeting. He's been told he's got to build a swimming pool. But within the contract, there's no provision for a swimming pool. There's no allowance as a provisional sum. So how can a swimming pool just be missed off? We don't understand. This is a clear sign that the employer's requirements are not reflected within the contract. But the alternative way is that it is included in the contract. An architect's instructions issued for the nomination, which is what the contract says, in the tiniest manner to enable the contractor to agree the terms, check the design compliant, and check that the nominated subcontractor can meet the programme, because those are crucial to the success and delivery of the overall project. Next slide, please. So, the common way. The employer goes to site, he doesn't see a swimming pool being constructed. How can he scolds the contractor, but how can the contractor know that a swimming pool is required if the consultants don't tell him that a swimming pool is required? Because it's not reflected in the contract. So this isn't the contractor's fault. So actually the employer is scolding the wrong person, where he should be scolding the consultants for missing off his requirements. The alternative is that the consultant is fully aware and can then issue the instruction to enable the contractor to build as per his plan. Next slide, please. So here's the difference. As we can see on the common way, the project's proceeding well, the builder's building what he's meant to be building, and the house is moving forward. On the right-hand side, the swimming pool's being built because it's included in the contract. The contractor's been able to plan, program, manage all the requirements of the swimming pool within his program because he's known about it from the start and the formation of the contract. That's what is crucial in this. Next slide, please. So we go back to the site meetings. Now, the employer's in the meeting and the contractor is being exposed and asked to explain why he's entitled to an extension of time owing to the late nomination of the swimming pool contractor. How can he do this when the employer is there and he has to start telling it's the consultant's fault because the consultants don't want to be blamed because ultimately there's been an oversight. So how can it be resolved? If we look at the alternative way, the contract administrator can sit down with the employer and talk them through and tell them that there's been an issue, but it's all in hand, the budget's not going to be affected, etc. Or if it is going to be affected, he can manage the expectations. But at the same time, a separate meeting's being held with the consultants and the contractor to understand how they can mitigate and minimize this disruption, this problem, and solve the problem, ultimately without the employer becoming fully aware of it, because that causes embarrassment to the parties. Next slide, please. Variations. So we often see here the QS, the architect, the engineer, everybody is scared to actually admit that a variation is due because this shows that somebody has failed. So we can't tell the boss that we failed. So what do? We bully the contractor. We say it's not the contract, it's no variation, get on with the works and argue later. And the contractor often does this because he feels he has no alternative. The alternative way is it's agreed between the parties that it is a variation and mistakes happened. So how can it be resolved? Well, the QS from both respective parties can agree on the amount that the variation is, agree on the time, and the works can proceed. And yes, it might be a hard conversation to have with the employer, that it's going to cost him more, but he's going to get a swimming pool at the end of the day. But that's what he's paid for. Next slide, please. Now we get onto the payments, which include the variations. What happens, or appears to happen frequently, which gives rise to a lot of disputes, is the QS red pens the applications made by the contractor. This gives a huge differential in the accounts at the end of the project, where the contractor is underpaid significantly, the employer has his product, and so it gives this unbalanced approach, which leads to a dispute. The alternative way is the parties agree on the amount due on a monthly basis at a meeting, administering the contract, applying fair and reasonable approach. The contract administrator can manage the employer's expectations also in his separate meetings instead of him being involved during the process. Next slide, please. So, the contract has been bullied throughout. We're at the end of the project, and now it's final account stage. So what happens? The common way. Here, a dispute arises. The alternative way, if it's managed throughout, the final account signed ahead of the timescales in the contract, and there's no leftover baggage for the parties, and there's no dispute. So actually, this could mean that they can move on to the next project together, working hand in hand, and effectively partner to develop building relationships. Next slide, please. In the common way, what happens is the employer's got his house, he's moved in. He receives a claim from the contractor, and a conversation like this transpires. Why should I pay the contractor more? I have moved in and I have my dream house. The architect says, you shouldn't, boss. And the employer says, but is it threatening to sue me? So the architect says, let him sue your boss. The architect's being paid for his services, and he then moves on to his next job. Next slide, please. 6 months later, the common way, the lawyers are involved, expert witnesses are involved, and the parties are in a dispute, whether it be adjudication, arbitration, or litigation. What happens is the costs just go through the roof. Where the alternative way is the final accounts agreed, the parties move on to the next project, and they begin building the next dream house together, working collaboratively. Next slide, please. So, a dispute evolved. The contractor only wanted an extra 20,000 ringgit. Now, the client has to pay 20,000 ringgit plus interest, plus 100k in lawyer costs, expert witness costs, and his own costs. And actually, the 20,000 ringgit problem has escalated into a 200,000 ringgit problem and has cost the employer 10 times more. So the alternative way is understand accidents, oversights arise, consider commercial settlements, look at mediation, but properly administer the contract as it goes. And consultants are meant to be independent. That's what their professional bodies say. They're meant to be independent. They're not meant to favour. They're meant to administer the contract for the benefit of all. Next slide, please. So the employer's a bit angry. He's looking for the architect. So where is the architect? Next slide, please. He's selling the same dream to somebody else. He's using the copied and pasted, badly drafted contract from the last project, continuing to wrongly administer the contract and without learning previous mistakes. We plead that it's time for administrators of the contract to act independently as per the professional bodies and administer the contracts for the good of all. Next slide, please. But what's the alternative? The alternative is a collaborative, work together approach, partnering with people, making it non-confrontational, non-adversarial, and moving on to the next project. Next slide, please. So the final thoughts that we can share with you. We know that every job is not the same, and we know that there are good and bad jobs. Similarly, there are good and bad consultants. So we cannot tarnish everybody with the same brush. But from experience in the Asian construction industry, there are lessons to be learned. The contract at the outset should reflect what the client wants at the end. And we also caution the use of LOAs, which we perceive to be lazy, which show that the consultants are ill-prepared at the outset. Because, from experience, if a project is tendered thoroughly at the outset, compiling the contract is easy. Consultants should understand their independent role and responsibility. Contracts should be administered for the good of all, and they should not be influenced by the boss. Leave things till the end. Agree variations, agree EOTs, chase payments, make prompt payments. Let's administer the contract for the benefit of all. Nominated subcontractors, a false economy. Late nomination of nominated subcontractors is a huge problem in the industry, and there are alternatives. NSCs are not a given and not necessary for the successful delivery of contracts. Contracts are bullied. Contractors are bullied to protect the face of consultants. It's time for contractors to fight back. More time at the start, understand what the end looks like, and work backwards to how the end will be achieved. Start with the end in mind. Too many jobs end up with lawyers involved in disputes. Consider commercial settlement instead of claims destined to fail, but which make lawyers rich. Don't forget, if your car breaks down, you see a mechanic. Before you see a lawyer, see a construction consultant. And we've listed 3 of our consultants who have taken part in this L2 conference. So thank you very much, and I'll now take questions from our hosts.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for sharing with us. Nick, looking at the slides, like the several people kicking a poor guy, you seem really negative about the consultants. You painted us a picture where the contractors are the helpless victims, suffering at the hands of the devilish consultants. I will come to the consultant later. Now my question is, are the contractors not to blame in any of these undesirable outcomes?
No, is the simple answer, because there's no smoke without fire, to coin a phrase. However, the contractor's primary role is to build. And in many instances, we see them being put under pressure to design elements where there's no design provisions in the contract. So these contracts are destined to fail because people are misadministering the contracts from the start. And that includes the contractors, because the contractors don't push back and highlight to the consultants their failings. So it's actually a two-way problem, where the contractors should be pushing back, but the consultants should be improving. So no, the contractor is not harmless in all of this.
I see. Okay, Nick, you refer to the employer as the boss in your slide to the consultants on many occasions, suggesting arm twisting happens from the beginning to the end of the projects. And also there is a lack of independency and professionalism on the consultant's part with regards to how the construction projects are managed. I personally may have some unpleasant experience with the consultants. However, I cannot agree with you, Nick. I don't think this is a common scene in the construction projects in Malaysia. I actually know a lot of consultants who actually put importance on integrity when it comes to their job. So rather than generalizing the situation, perhaps you can share with us your personal experience in Malaysia to justify your view and how things are done differently in other countries that perhaps you are familiar with?
Okay, so we currently have one project where a foreign senior manager for the employer has come into the contract partway through, is illegally enforced himself on the contract, on the consultants, and he hasn't been appointed under the contract. So we see that he has usurped his role and responsibilities and is not actually allowing the consultants to carry on with their duties under the contract, so much so that he's actually appointed a third party to undermine the work done by the project QS. So the contract states one QS and he's brought in a third party to revalue the works. But the existing QS is still on the project. Now, we believe that any consultant with a sense of pride would have resigned from that position, especially when we have evidence to prove that the parties are not being paid by the employer. So we think that consultants and contractors should stand up more to the employers. And obviously with the introduction of adjudication, this should aid this process.
And how things are done differently in other countries, like for example, your home country?
Yeah, as I said earlier, and as hopefully the slides portrayed the image, that the contract administrator actually deals with the employer on a one-to-one basis or a separate meeting from the consultants. And in this way, the consultants can actually work together to resolve issues instead of thinking that the boss is there and they can't say this, they can't say that, because that leads to indecisions which actually delay the process and further cause the disputes to arise.
Right. Okay, Nick. Assuming that what you described is an actual reflection of the consultants, you also believe that they have been left off the hook while the employer is left to face the legal consequences and suffers. Can you share with us your view, what measures can be taken to address this issue?
I think that as professionals, we have to all carry professional indemnity insurance. And the employers are very quick, probably based upon the consultant's advice, to target the contractor into the dispute. Whereas actually, the fundamental failing is of the consultant. And it would be interesting to see if a few professional indemnity policies were challenged by employers to see the outcome.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Loon, do you have any questions for Nick?
Oh yes, of course. I must first comment on Nick's presentation. Firstly, the presentation was really informative, and secondly, Nick really understands Malaysians, because he actually tried very, very hard to speak slowly and also clearly, and he has done it and done it well, right? Thanks Nick for that. Now, I wish to reiterate again during my introduction of this session that Nick's view presented in this session is solely his own and does not represent the L2 construction series platform. I think this is very understandable. From my own point of view as a lawyer, I also noticed from Nick's presentation that he took a very cautious view about lawyers being brought on board at the early stage when a problem arises. Now, from my own experience, I really cannot agree with that, because I have been brought on board when an issue arises during the course of the works. Of course, it would also depends what kind of problems that arose in a particular project. But most of the time, you cannot divorce technicality from contractual obligations, because these two things go hand in hand. And when a lawyer is brought on board at the early stage, the employer not only will be able to be advised properly on the technical part of it, but also the legal part of it, so that they can actually formulate a better strategy to deal with the problems at hand. And most of the time, my experience is that when the lawyer and the external consultant are being brought on board at the very early stage, they will be able to resolve the problems more effectively, and at least to prevent the problem from being snowballed to another level, so that the problems can be contained at the very early stage with the lawyers on board as well. Now, it's not that we promote lawyers in this particular sense. It's just that for lawyers, when you have a big problem, you come to them, they will be able to, in fact, earn more money. But if you are able to bring in the lawyers and the external consultants at the appropriate time, you contain the problem, you don't need to go for arbitration. In fact, you don't need to spend more legal fees at the later stage if you are able to bring the right people on board and resolve the problems at the early stage. Now, that is my view. Again, does not represent Nick's or anybody else. But the thing is that I will go on to question you, Nick. I have a few questions for you. Now, you have pointed out about the problems associated with the nominated subcontract structure. Now, are these problems only peculiar in Malaysia, and it is actually not a problem that you found elsewhere?
In the UK, actually, nominated subcontractors tended to are not really used anymore. They use a term called named subcontractors. Will list a number of named subcontractors that can undertake a scope of works, but they're named in the contract for the parties to liaise with and engage with at the outset, so that they understand what they are signing up to. What we see here a lot of the time is that the nominations come late, and I think that this is a misunderstanding by the consultants, understanding how much more work the contractors have to do in terms of agreeing the terms, the procurement, agreeing the program. The price is just one element of the puzzle, let's call it. So that's something that we've seen where the UK doesn't use nominations, and I think it's probably because it causes a lot of problems down the line.
I see. Okay, if Nick, if the NSC structure is here to stay, which is likely, because I also understand that there have been some movements to get rid of this NSC structure and to move towards what you have just said, like a list of preferred contractors for the contractor to approach for certain specialized works or specialist works. Now, if this NSC structure is here to stay for, in fact, I predict it will be for a longer time, what suggestions do you have for the audience to deal with this problem?
Obviously, the program is the responsibility of the contractors at the outset for getting agreed with the consultants. So we would say to the contractors, put the nomination of NSCs as early in the program as you can. Obviously, it's got to be reasonable, but make sure that the stipulated date gives you sufficient time to enable you to do your due diligence, what's required before the NSC is appointed.
I see. Okay, let's, I think I don't have further questions on NSC, but I would like to go back to the questions or the topic relating to the consultants. Again, it appears, even from Hong Kit's questioning, you still maintain doubts as to the consultants being the contract administrator in a project. Now, the general question first, is architect or consultant the appropriate person to administer the contract? If you think it's no, then what is the reason for that from your own experience?
With the advancement of technology, and we see things like BIM and AutoCAD, when I joined the industry, these weren't such tools regularly used. You know, it was a bit more old-fashioned with drawings and things like that. So the architect had actually understand buildability. Nowadays, we have a lot of conceptual architects who have a vision, a dream. But like we said at the outset, that isn't what the contract reflects. So there needs to be a better understanding and approach in terms of making sure the contract, which is drafted by, you know, the parties, and I'm not just saying it's architects, it's the architects, it's the PQSs, it's the engineers, a more holistic approach so that the employer's requirements are actually reflected in the contract. And that means that they have to do more talking, probing of the employer at the outset. And this will lead to more competitive bids, better, and hopefully fewer disputes.
I see. In your experience, I just want to know, investigate further, why do you have some reservations about the consultants? In your experience in Malaysia, how do you find the consultant today? Actually, usually, I mean, like to be challenged by the contractors or even the external consultants as well?
Well, I can't actually take claim for this story, but one of my friends actually had an instance which emphasizes my belief that consultants don't like to be challenged, where he was asking a question of an architect. The architect didn't like the question, and my friend, being a fellow claims consultant, wouldn't take no for an answer, so kept probing the architect. And the architect flipped and decided to start shouting to call the police. I don't know what the police would do in this instance. It'd be quite an interesting charge sheet, I would suggest, if they were to try and launch I don't know. I have no idea on what grounds somebody could be charged for asking a question. But the architect didn't like the question, and so what are the police there? And in my view, the architect should be arrested for wasting police time. But that's just my personal.
Well, I guess that's perhaps only an isolated incident. I think both myself and Hong Kit, and perhaps you as well, Nick, despite all the incidences like this has happened and you have encountered, you know, at the end of the day, for a successful implementation of a particular project, all persons involved must cooperate and do their part professionally and fairly as well. Now, to end my question for you, I have a last question for you, Nick, is that having assessed all these situations and what you have said today, right, from an objective point of view, and having understood a little bit about the Malaysian culture, which is obviously different from the Western culture in many ways, do you think that the problems in Malaysia that you have seen and encountered are really rooted in a cultural aspect, which unfortunately is not compatible with the requirements of the contract? Or is it got to do with pure or sheer incompetency of our consultants here in Malaysia? Your view?
I think there's no right and wrong answer to that question, because obviously there's good, there's successful projects completed, there's good companies out there, there's bad companies out there, but there does appear to be a problem with the hierarchy in terms of the employer getting too involved. The employer pays somebody to do a job, so the employer should let those consultants do the job and not interfere. I think things like, I think it's going in the right direction with the Adjudication Act being brought in, but I think that that needs to change, where people challenge and raise adjudications during the course of the works instead of waiting till final account stage, because it's only by the parties fighting back and working together, but sometimes in a confrontational way, which will benefit the industry in the long term. So I think that it's the adjudication, and don't wait till the end. As soon as there's a gulf between what's being claimed versus what's being certified, you can adjudicate. It doesn't prevent you from adjudicating during the course of the works. And if people start being challenged a bit more, hopefully we will see an improvement.
I see. All right. I think we have overrun again for this session for about 8 minutes. Now, Nick, do you have any closing remarks for the audience?
I would just like to thank all the participants for taking the time during this lockdown period. Obviously, everybody's no doubt climbing the walls. I certainly am. I'd like to thank yourself, Loon, and Hong Kit for setting this up. I think it's a great initiative. I'd be keen to participate in future ones if I'm invited back and not
surely
asked to leave the country based upon my views. So yeah, thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing the other exciting webinars that are to come up in the next few days.
Okay.
Hong Kit,
thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today, especially your friend's police story. Right. We may not necessarily agree with everything that Nick has expressed. We all know the West is not without their own problems. However, it's quite important not to live in ignorance, as this is how some foreigners who are working in Malaysia may see us. There is always room for improvement. We may take this MCO time to actually realize it and come out a better version of ourselves. Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope you enjoyed. Please continue to leave us questions and we will address them at our Q&A only session on the 13th. Also, as you can see on the screen, we will be having a Bahasa Malaysia version on 3 p.m. Because we have received quite a number of requests from our audience. For that session, we have SR Amran Majid from JKR and Tan Swim as our special guests. And you would definitely not want to miss tomorrow's session. Our guest is none other than Tan Swim. See you tomorrow again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Nick.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you, Loon.
Thank you, Hong Kit.